Next subject presented by Heather Vancura, the Java community process, advance your career and help define Java's future. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There are many things about the technology that are unique that make Java special in terms of why developers choose it and why companies continue to choose it in terms of platform completeness and technically built-in features like security and scalability. But I think the most important are the things that relate to the community, so the way that Java is developed. And that's something that oftentimes Java developers don't necessarily know about or realize, is that Java is actually developed collaboratively with you, the community of Java developers. And I believe that is one of the primary reasons that Java continues to be so successful today, is that active ecosystem involvement with the evolution of the language. And of course, the Java community process is the mechanism for bringing in that community involvement. So I'm clearly a little bit biased. I've been working with Java for over 15 years, and specifically with the Java community. So, you know, I clearly have a vested interest in this in terms of what I think is special about Java and what makes it so unique. But I think there's been a lot of talk lately about, as developers, how can you grow your career? Because clearly there's a lot of pressure on developers in terms of there's lots of different markets and pulling away developers from their current community. So I think there's a little bit more of a focus in terms of how can you make yourself stand out as a developer? And clearly also, you know, as people raised their hands earlier this morning, the majority of you here attending this conference today are not only working as developers, but also Java developers. So you're clearly doing the right things there, but what else can you do to make yourself stand out as a developer and continue to be in demand? Well, the first computer programmer was Ada Lovelace, so I have to give a little credit to her here today. That's one of my other personal passions, is women in tech. But specifically, what I want to say is what I've really seen over the last 15 years, when I first started getting involved with Java back in 2000, there really was still that closed source mentality with developers. And truly, when you talk to developers all around the world, which is what I do as part of my job as chairing the Java community process, it really was the developer with the best technical skills would win. And developers really were working primarily on their own solo versus needing to have to work together as a team. You still could differentiate yourself based solely on your technical skills. But I think there's definitely been a shift over the last 15 years. Clearly, we've shifted to open source development model. That's now the current expectation and in the community, and so the majority of the community has shifted there. And so as a developer, it's increasingly become the fact that if you want to be winning and differentiating yourself, you need to have the best people skills. So I think there's been a shift from the best technical skills to the best people skills. So clearly you'll always be able to find a developer with better technical skills and who can maybe do the job for a little bit less based on where you are geographically in the world. But I believe the way that you can differentiate yourself is through the people skills. And I think if you look at the job of computer programmer, engineer, developer, whatever you want to differentiate or make the title of, I believe 50% of the job now currently does consist more of those soft skills. So you're spending a lot more time working as a team, in meetings, communicating, collaborating. Still, a majority of your time is technical, and you need to keep up your technical skills, but I think there's definitely more of an emphasis from employers on the soft skills. So this article I looked up last month, which is talking about what are the top skills required for tech jobs. And there's these top 5 soft skills that engineers need to succeed in technology. Communication, creative and critical thinking, adaptability, flexibility, collaboration, and teamwork, and leadership. So these are a little bit different skills than you might think of when you think of yourself as an engineer. And these types of skills are not necessarily easy to acquire. The technical skills you can learn over time. You can take classes online, either solo or at a university or one of those boot camps that are offered now to learn technical skills. It's a little bit easier to acquire those technical skills, especially if you have a background in computer science. But these soft skills require human interactions. Really, the only way to develop these skills is through deep and complex human interactions. So having that practical experience. So where are you going to get these skills if you're not able to acquire them through your job and you're focusing more on the technical side of things? Coming to events like this is clearly one of the places you can do it, going to conferences, engaging in community events, also participating in the JCP. So that's one of the ways you can advance your career. I'm trying to talk to you a little bit about how you can do that today. Participating in hack days or kids coding workshops, getting some experience communicating and kind of building up those skills in your repertoire. So the Java community process is one way that you can acquire these skills. Many people don't know what the JCP is. They may have heard of it before. Maybe I'll just take a quick show of hands. Who knows what the JCP is, the Java community process? A few of you do. I'm glad to see a few hands raised, and that's pretty common. I do a lot of events all around the world, and it's pretty common that A, everyone's an engineer at the conferences I go to. B, they're using Java, and then a small majority know what the JCP is. So the JCP is where we evolve everything in the JavaX namespace. So we develop collaboratively with the community, the Java platforms. And why would developers want to get involved in this? Again, some of the ways that you can advance your career is by acquiring not only the technical knowledge, which you will acquire through participating in the JCP. You're going to learn about what's coming in the next versions of Java, Java SE, Java EE, as well as some of the things that are not implemented as part of the platform, some of the standalone specs. So you'll have an opportunity to find out a year or two in advance where the Java platform is headed, in what direction, and what some of the new technologies that we're focusing on, where they're going. So you continue to build those technical skills, but you're also going to be gaining those soft skills. So working together to develop collaboratively the specs in the Java technology landscape, you're learning soft skills like communication, teamwork, and collaboration. Some of those skills that you can use to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. You're also being altruistic, but also in the same sense, you're making the technology that you're using every day better. So by getting that real-world developer feedback into the specification development process, you're actually making the technology better. So before it's final and implemented in products, you have a chance to make Java, the technology that you're using every day in your job, a better technology with real-world developer feedback. You're going to advance your career, and while you do it, you're going to be having fun. So I asked some of our members over the last year why you get involved in the JCP, and I included here one of my favorite ones from Heinz Kibbutz, which is fitting since we're in Greece. Joining the JCP is like being a Java citizen. So it's your citizenship, but also the majority of the quotes that I get from developers who have started to participate more actively in the JCP program are it's helping them advance their career, it's helping them to become more visible in the community, and it's giving them that thought leader position within not only the community, but also within their organization. So what is the JCP and how does it work? You may or may not know, since most of you didn't raise your hand when I said who knows what the JCP is, that the majority of the work at the JCP is really about Java specification requests, or JSRs. So I'm sure as a Java developer, you've heard the term JSR mentioned here, there, and everywhere. So it's a Java specification request, and that's the primary pursuit of the JCP, overseeing the development of JSRs. And those are led by members of the JCP. Any JCP member can be a spec lead, and they're responsible for forming expert groups, which are made up of the Java community, members of the Java community. But we also have a way for people who aren't members of the expert group or the spec leads to actually participate and get involved in this process. So that's what I'm going to share a little bit more with you about. So as a JSR goes through its regular life cycle, they all follow the same life cycle, whether they're a platform JSR for Java Enterprise Edition or Java SE Standard Edition, or they're a standalone specification led by an independent community member. They go through the same development cycle, and that includes 3 public reviews for the community, whether you're a JCP member or not. There are specific time periods where you can provide your input on what you think should be happening with this technology, whether you think it's doing the right thing, your feedback if you're testing out some of the early access reference implementation builds, your comments on the specification, whether it's clear or there's things that are ambiguous. It's all allowed for in the JCP process for each JSR that goes through the same cycle. And a JSR is not only required to have a specification, Java specification request, as the name might imply, but actually every JSR is required to deliver 3 things. And these 3 things reinforce some of the primary tenets of Java and what makes it so successful. So a reference implementation, the actual code, so that's proving that you can actually build an implementation of the specification. And also a test suite, so ensuring that backwards compatibility. That is another one of the primary reasons that I believe Java continues to be so successful, not only with developers, but also with companies who are implementing Java. That backwards compatibility ensures that their applications aren't going to break. And the specification process also allows for that rich ecosystems of choice for developers to be formed. So you have a reference implementation, but if you choose to, you can just take the specification and develop your own independent implementation, and that creates more choice for developers. So those 3 things all work together in the JCP. And we have members that are not only corporations, as we've had in the past. We've opened up the JCP, so now we're having people who participate representing all different types of developers. Not only the corporations, vendors, as well as end users, but also open source groups like Apache and Eclipse, and Java user groups. So the Hellenic Java user group is actually a member of the JCP. I think there's some representatives in the audience. I saw a couple. Yeah, hi, welcome. So we have them participating as well as individual Java developers. So those people who want to advance their career and get involved in defining the future of Java, those individual developers can now participate without having any barriers to doing that in the JCP. So jugs around the world, as I mentioned, I've added most recently, as of this morning, I added the Hellenic Java User Group logo here, so you can see it there on the top right. 15,000 users, so clearly I have this slide up here not to say, whoa, how impressive, we have 15,000 people doing and participating in this process with us formally, but the fact that obviously, we have a lot of room to grow. We can get more developers to participate in this effort, but at the same time, it's not one company that's participating in defining the future of Java. It's a multitude of companies. We have over 800 members, so that's corporate members as well as open source members and individual Java developers. So all working together, participating and giving input into what's going to become the next versions of Java. So just what it looks like graphically, our organization, as I mentioned, most of the heavy lifting is done by the JSRs, so the spec leads of the JSRs and the expert group. That's in the middle of the slide here, showing the spec leads and the expert group members. But also what's vitally important is having people who aren't necessarily members of those JSRs participating and giving their feedback. The Java developers can give their feedback. I chair the organization, and then I also chair the executive committee, which is essentially the board of directors. So we're overseeing and giving direction to the organization as a whole, but also the executive committee is responsible for voting on all of the JSRs. So here's our executive committee. We meet face-to-face 3 times a year, get together face-to-face and spend 2 days together in some part of the world. Maybe someday we'll have our face-to-face in Greece. This was our meeting from a couple weeks ago in Austin, Texas, and our next meeting will be in San Francisco. Earlier this year we met in London, so we try to vary the location every year where we're meeting face-to-face. But we also meet every month on the telephone. So again, with the executive committee, we're having not just companies on this board, but also open source groups, 2 Java user group representatives, and 2 individual Java developers. So we try to represent the needs of the entire Java community and the ecosystem, rather than just have it be companies and vendors who are giving the support and guidance to the organization overall. Now, some people do say to me, well, Java's open source now. It has been for over 10 years now, so why do we still need the JCP? Why do we still need open standards? Why can't it just be open source? Well, I think we can have both, and I know that most standards organizations these days are kind of shifting and grappling with these same issues, but in the JCP, what's worked really well is that we cooperate together on the standards development process. It's not just about the code. We still believe we need to have specifications as well as ensuring that compatibility, and keeping the structure of the JCP intact allows us to do that. So we agree on what we're going to standardize on within the JCP. We cooperate together. Competitors come together and cooperate, and then they agree to compete on the implementations. So that helps the vendors and the corporate customers, as well as helping the developers. So that gives you more choice, it gives you more transparency into being able to use the technology to have that specification and documentation process. Actually, Brian Getz came to our last executive committee meeting when we talked about OpenJDK and looking at ways to ease cooperation between the JCP and OpenJDK. And one of his favorite quotes that I put actually out on Twitter was, the specs are the crown jewel of Java. So the specs are really kind of this underrated resource that you have as a Java developer, and one of the things that I think also reinforce the popularity of the language year over year. So we have the open source implementations. You may or may not be aware that OpenJDK is actually the reference implementation for Java SE. There's a JSR for Java SE, and then Project Glassfish is the reference implementation for Java EE. So these are open source projects that are essentially the reference implementations. So one of those 3 deliverables I told you about that every JSR has a specification, it has a reference implementation, and then it has a test suite. So the reference implementations are the open source projects. Those are the projects that you can get involved in if you want to contribute and give feedback on the code before the platforms are finalized and then put into shipping products. So my organization overall, as I said, JSRs and the technologies are the main focus and the things that we look at, but we also look at reforming the organization and looking at how we can get more developers to participate. So I'll share with you a little bit about these 3 things, starting with the technology. So the latest 3 Java platform releases that are currently available, Java ME 8 was actually updated after 5 years of platform progress or updates. So there is a new release of Java ME, and some people say, well, why is that? But actually this was a focus on embedded devices. So this is a really big growth market for Java, and there are some members of the community that are focused on continuing to use Java. There's certain advantages that it provides over versus other technologies. And again, that's part of the end-to-end story of Java. It runs on very small embedded devices all the way up to the high-end servers. So update to Java ME, the latest update of Java EE 7. So this is the current release of Java EE 7, made up of many different component JSRs. This was released in May 2013, so that's now 4 years ago. We're obviously currently working on the next release of Java EE 8, which is planned to be released later this year. But the last release was put out several years ago. It did take a while for the ecosystem to catch up, but this latest slide that we just updated earlier this year shows that there still have been a lot of people implementing Java EE. And a lot of developers often, when I ask who's using Java EE or Java EE 7, don't necessarily raise their hand. But then if you start to ask about some of the component JSRs, who's using JaxRS, who's using CDI, almost every developer will raise their hand. So whether or not you're using the entire platform or one of the application servers that are implemented using Java EE 7, you're using Java EE technologies. So a rich ecosystem of choice in the Java EE space, clearly. These are the current application servers that are compatible based on Java EE 7. So that's good news to see this continued growth in the Java EE space. And of course, Java SE 8, released in March 2014. That's the current release out in production of Java SE, the standard edition. Again, JSR is developed through the JCP. So Java SE 8 is unique in that it was wildly successful. Part of that is based on the technology. So key features that developers had been anticipating for a very long time, like the introduction of lambdas, the streams API, new date and time API, and annotations. Those were all really widely anticipated things that developers were looking to add into the Java platform. So that being the case, I would say Java 8 was the most successful platform release of Java ever. I've worked on every platform release since 2000. We were on 1.2 at that point, and a wildly successful release. How many people are using Java 8 in the room? Most of you are using Java 8, so that's never been the case for any Java platform release that I've seen recently. So, well, recently, over 15 years, so. Big adoption. I think that's the technology, first of all, right? Like I said, it's the features, but it's also the fact that we've really opened things up and gotten developers to test the early access builds of Java SE before it was put into the marketplace. So the community really got involved with Java 8 in terms of testing it out, running their applications against it, and providing feedback through the JCP and through OpenJDK. So I think it's really important to continue that community participation in the evolution of the Java platform, and I think Java 8 was a success story for that. Secondly, JCP.next. So looking at how we're going to change the organization. So the JCP was started over 15 years ago as the mechanism to bring developers into the development of Java. So we have a constitution, a way the JCP works to evolve the organization overall. And we started this effort about 5 years ago, and we called it JCP.next. So how are we going to change our rules and our process and our governance to accommodate this shift that I talked about earlier, from closed source to open source, from just involving corporations to involving the whole ecosystems of user groups, open source groups, and individual Java developers, so people like you who are passionate about the technology that you use every day. So the first thing it was important to do was recognize that you need to be able to see what's going on. It used to be that the JSRs were developed in a closed fashion, so kind of behind closed doors, which is the graphic of a smoke-filled room, right? So you're working and no one has any access to what's happening until the very end of your development cycle. Now everything's done in the open. All of the expert groups operate with open mailing lists that the public can view, and also open issue trackers, so you can follow along as things are developed, not just seeing the specification drafts that are coming out, but actually viewing the conversation, looking at the meeting minutes, looking at the issue trackers, and seeing what's being worked on within the specification. Secondly, we used to have more than one executive committee, so trying to be a little bit more agile and eliminate oversight and bureaucracy that wasn't necessary, we merged it down to have one executive committee. And thirdly, last year, we actually introduced new membership levels. So as I mentioned, it used to be more of a focus on companies, so we recognize that one size does not fit all. So how can we broaden our membership and bring in the entire ecosystem, not just the companies, but look at what are the barriers to that happening? And one of them was the fact that it was one size fit all, so we needed to create different levels of membership. There was a small fee for participation initially. We eliminated all of the membership fees, so there's no fee to join the JCP. And it used to be that you would have to download and sign a 12-page legal agreement to join the JCP. And again, that only applies to certain companies that want to participate in the JCP. So lighter weight electronic agreements for people like Java user groups and individual Java developers to make it easier for them to join. And also to recognize their contributions. So instead of just having the JSR spec lead and expert group recognized on every JSR page, we now introduced a contributor category. So people who are looking at the drafts and giving us that feedback throughout the interim life cycle of the JSR, you can be recognized as a JCP contributor. You're listed on the JSR. And again, that's one of the primary things that JCP members have found advance their career and give them that visibility in the community, is having your name listed on the JSR detail page. So it's listed there for life, whether you leave the JCP or not. Once a JSR is final, your name is listed on that JSR page. On jcp.org. So it's giving you that recognition in the community, the visibility, and being able to be seen as an expert. And we also added seats on the executive committee to primarily represent the needs of the individual Java developers. So 2 seats on the executive committee to make sure the interests of the individual developers who are independent are being recognized and looked after. So now we have 3 levels of membership. You can join as an individual. If you want to join as an individual, you can join as an associate member, and that would give you the ability to be nominated to be a contributor on any JSR. Java user group organizations can join as a partner member, and then we still continue to have the full members. So you can join as a full member, and then you serve on an expert group, either as a JSR spec lead or an expert group member, and vote on the full seats of the executive committee. We have elections every year to elect the executive committee. So the result of those efforts in terms of JCP.next really has made the JCP more open than it was before. We're already thinking about other things we can do to advance the JCP. As I mentioned, we had some meetings earlier this year where we're looking at how we can evolve it further. So we're always open to receiving that feedback from you also in terms of things that we can do to respond to the needs of the community in terms of adapting the overall governance. So how will you participate? As an individual, it's okay, but as I said earlier, in terms of the focus on careers, it's really better to work as part of a team. So you can work as part of a team either through your Java user group. You have a great Java user group here in Athens. Thomas is sitting over there. You can talk to him about getting involved. That's a great way to get involved and work together on contributing. But you can also work through your employer. So one thing you can do to advance your career is start a group internally with some of the developers you're working with, and have these talks once a week, once a month, where you come together and look at some of the specs and collect some feedback, or maybe learn about the technology and share what you've learned. So you're helping each other, you're teaching each other, and you're working with each other and learning those soft skills that I talked about earlier, which you aren't going to learn from taking an online course or reading a book. You're going to learn them through the human interactions that you can start to do through participating in some of these activities. And the other thing that we found in terms of asking the spec leads what kind of feedback they're getting from the community as they go through the JSR lifecycle is that working together and getting a collective feedback coming from a handful of developers in a Java user group versus one individual Java developer's experience, you're able to achieve a lot more, and it's a richer feedback that they're appreciating and really craving more of. So one of the top complaints from spec leads is, why aren't people commenting on all of my work that I'm putting out there? They have the opportunity to do that, but I'm not getting enough feedback. So this is not something where you're being a pest if you're providing your feedback. This is something that is actively desired by the people who are leading the specifications. Hearing from you, people are using the technology every day. How is it working for you? What are some of the things that you're looking to change? What are some of your use cases? These are all things that are highly desired. So if you do want to get involved, I broke it down into 6 steps. So starting with the first step clearly is pick a JSR, right? So if you looked at the participation stats earlier, there are over 380 JSRs. That's a little bit overwhelming. So the first step you need to do is pick one, right? So this is a list of some of the newer JSRs. Most of these are focused on either Java EE8 or Java SE9. But there's a link where you can go and get the active JSRs. There are usually about 14 or so active JSRs, so JSRs that haven't gone final yet, where the expert group and spec lead are currently actively working on them. So most of the JSRs are Java EE 8 related, 15 plus JSRs currently being developed. So those are looking at retargeting Java EE to address trends in the cloud and microservices. That's the primary focus for Java EE. Java EE 8, so it's set to be released later this year in 2017. Clearly, lots of different technologies going into Java EE 8. So the slide where I listed the JSRs earlier, this is a graphic representation of them. The more major updates are in orange. So you can see all of these technologies are being updated currently with new JSRs. So these are JSRs where you can actively get involved and give your feedback. They're all pretty far along, so they're in their second, most of them are in their second public review period. So this is a great time to actually download and test out the early access reference implementations for any bugs and provide your feedback. So the other platform release that some JSRs are targeted toward is Java 9. So that's JDK 9. Java 9 is developed in OpenJDK, so it also has JEPs that correspond with it, over 122 JEPs currently targeted for Java SE 9, which is also scheduled to be released later this year. Obviously, the big one for Java 9 is modularity, Project Jigsaw, the module system, so that's JEP 261. It also has a corresponding JSR, that's JSR 376, as well as the platform JSR, JSR 379. So there are early access builds of Java 9 available. Like I talked about earlier with the success of Java 8, a big contributing factor to that was the community going and downloading the early access builds and testing it out and providing feedback. So you can do the same thing with Java 9. There are early access builds. The link is there, jdk.java.net/9, where you'll find the latest build. We're up to build 170, it just came out this week. So you can download it and test it out. But Java 9 is not all just about modularity. There are a lot of other features going into it, which the community is looking forward to. I picked just a few of the top ones here. JShell and JLink are some of the most popular ones from the user group members I've talked with who have downloaded and started to try out some of the new functionality with Java 9. Okay. So, as I mentioned, they all, have a JSR page. Every JSR has a page. So out of these list of new technologies that are being developed in the JCP right now, the active JSRs, pick one. So that's where you can start. Pick one, go to jcp.org, and there you're going to find links to the latest drafts, as well as links to the public discussion and the issue tracker. So those are great places to start when you go to the page and familiarize yourself with what's being discussed now, what are some of the issues, and what's the current draft that's available. You'll find that all on the jcp.org JSR page. So once you find that JSR and the number, go and find it on jcp.org and follow the links and just familiarize yourself with what's going on. And particularly if you decide you want to look at the specification, don't feel like you need to read the entire thing. They can go into the hundreds of pages, so you can pick out one particular section. You don't have to say, I'm going to read the entire thing. You can pick out a section that applies to you, and in your feedback, be specific on what section your comments address. So that's the second part, which is once you pick the technology that you're interested in, communicate about it, right? So share on the mailing list that you're interested in getting involved and you want to provide your feedback. Tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of what perspective you can bring. So this is, again, part of the pathway to being recognized as a contributor. If that's something you want to do to advance your career, would be making yourself known. So the spec lead and the expert group will read that. And so just giving that initial communication makes your presence known, and then providing that feedback, communicating that feedback to set yourself up to give that recognition to help you advance your career. The next step would be then actually taking the action, right? So that's the next question I get from the community often. Okay, so first of all, it's overwhelming. There's so many technologies. What can I do? I don't know where to go. Pick the technology, but then you also need to actually decide what you're going to do. That can be the next hurdle that developers run into. So what's needed? What can I actually contribute? So especially in this late phase of development that we're in with the platform releases, I think it's really important to share your feedback and comment on the public discussion lists and issue trackers, but also read the early access versions of the spec as well as the reference implementation and give your feedback, right? It's getting really close to being final, so it could be even you might think of it as a small thing of proofreading, right? Or specifying things that seem a little bit ambiguous, so that aren't clear to you as you read it. So it's important to read and learn about things that you use every day. So if you're looking at this as a final release, what would be your questions? What are things that you're looking for? Write some sample applications. So some of the new functionality, it's really helpful to have sample applications. Really helpful to include those, and those can be included from the community. It doesn't need to come from the spec lead. So you can run hack days that are based around that. In your company or in your user group, you can have a hack day where you download the reference implementation and test it out and collect your feedback and send it to the list or comment on the issue tracker. The other thing that's really helpful, and some people don't think this is very significant, but it actually does help with promoting that adoption and also giving you some visibility in the community, is doing some evangelism around the technology. So letting people know that the build is out, letting people know that you've looked at it, what do you think about it? So that kind of that social media, blogging, doing talks in your local community, whether you do it at your company or in your Java user group or at conferences like this. So you don't have to be the spec lead to give a talk on a JSR. It's needed all over the world. The spec lead and the expert group members can't be the only one who are giving the talks and getting the community ready for these technologies. As a Java developer, you can read these documents, download the code, and give a talk yourself. That's a great way to actually learn about a new technology, is tell yourself you're going to give a talk about it in a certain specified amount of time, 2-3 months from now, and then go and learn about it and develop the talk as you go. That's also really helpful. And of course, documentation, especially if you're not as technical, the help with the documentation is always appreciated. So just to give you a graphic of what it looks like, every JSR is going to have an issue tracker like this. A lot of the spec leads rely heavily on the issue trackers. It's required to have an issue tracker for every JSR, so this is a great place to read up on the latest issues and also provide your comments. So it's a public issue tracker. Provide your comments here and give some context about your comments. You can also share what you learned. So most of the specs for Java EE have now moved on to GitHub. We also have an Adopt a JSR GitHub organization where we have some resources that you can reuse. Java user groups around the world, particularly Java user groups from London and Brazil and South Africa, have developed some rich hack days materials. So if you decide you do want to have a hack day, you can go to the Adopt a JSR GitHub organization and download some of the materials. You don't need to create those from scratch. So things like benchmarks and tutorial materials for walking your community through some of the things that are coming with Java 9. So rather than just say, oh, here, go download JDK 9 and test it out, it gives you a little bit more structure when you want to run those hack days in your community. And Java EE, all the specs are under the Java EE organization, so you can view all of the code and specifications as they're being developed. But again, those links are available off of jcp.org and the JSR page. So step number 6, and the last step, participate in hack days. So collaborate together, get together, have fun, learn about the technology, and develop those skills that I told you about that are going to be crucial in the coming 3 to 5 years in terms of differentiating yourself as a developer. This happens to be a hack day from Devoxx UK last year in London. So this is the CDI hack day that we had with happened to have the spec lead there from Red Hat, CDI spec lead Antoine Saboduran, and a few community members. And I also like this picture because it's not one of those hack days where you have 50 people. That's also one of the things that can seem a little bit overwhelming or intimidating, is getting together that many people. You say your community's small, you don't work with enough people. As you can see here, there's 4 developers working together with the spec lead in this hack day, and it was a very successful hack day. And even talking to bigger, larger communities like London and Brazil, who have thousands of members, some of their best hack days are with 4 to 5 developers. So don't be intimidated and think that you don't have enough of a crowd to get together and give feedback that's going to be useful. It can actually be a really small amount of people. So you can also participate in OpenJDK as a result of a lot of these transparency efforts that we put together over the last 3 to 5 years on the last platform releases. There actually is an adoption group created in OpenJDK. So you can join the adoption group, and the purpose of this is to get the community ready for the latest release of Java 9. So there's now an adoption group on OpenJDK. You can join the list there, and it gives you a little bit of feedback in terms of how you can structure your feedback. What's changing in this latest release, what's being added, what's being removed. It gives you a little bit of guidance in terms of a new developer who wants to get involved and get ready for the next release. And of course, in OpenJDK, they're already working on things beyond Java 9. So coming next, we've Project Valhalla and Project Panama. So you can follow along in those discussions as well. Again, because it's public and open, you don't have to be a member of the expert group to participate. So Adopted JSR is another thing that we started, and your local user group here is participating in this, so I encourage you to join that Java user group. I know they're talking about some events to have over the next few months where you can get involved through your Java user group, so I encourage you to do that and get involved to receive that attention and get a little bit more experience with the technology as it's coming out. Some of the most popular user groups, just to give you an example of what people have done, so I have 4 user groups here. London Java Community, so they've done a lot of work on Java 9, but also instrumental in date and time API. So that's an idea that actually originated within the London Java community and was first submitted by a member of the London Java community with an implementation of Jota Time, Stephen Colburn. So a really successful and active user group participating with us in this development of the specifications. Secondly, in Belgium, so the Belgian Java user group actually created a sample application with JSR 356. That was a new technology going into Java EE. They didn't have that functionality previously. So again, as developers, you want to have those sample applications. There weren't any, and the sample application that the Belgium JUG created was actually shipped with the SDK of Java EE 7. So it's in a shipping product. So clearly they got a lot of recognition in the product release for that Java EE 7 announcement. And in Brazil, again, very active and engaged community, and they're participating many times through, they call it dojos and versus hack days in their community, but also translating and providing that knowledge within the universities, within all of their different Java user group, because they're a huge population of Java developers in Brazil. So they're working together to educate their community locally, get them ready for the new technology, and translate some of the things that are required, since they really prefer to have things in their local language. So a lot of translation into Portuguese. That's another thing that you can do to get involved in. If you want to have things in your local language, get some recognition in that way. And in India, they're also getting more active and participating more in doing hack days and creating sample applications. For Java EE 7, they were quite involved. So it's possible that when I'm talking about user groups that are participating in the JCP next year, I could be talking about the Hellenic Java user group. I could have your slide here depending on what you decide to do with these latest releases, but those are my 4 use cases for some of the user groups that have gotten involved in some of the things that they've done around the world. And with the releases of Java SE9 and Java EE 8 coming out later this year, we'll definitely be highlighting some of the community involvement and participation. So if you do decide to get involved, make sure you communicate back with me and let me know some of the things that you've done, because that's one of the things that I do, is give feedback to the product group and let them know what community feedback and support we've gotten. So we really do need you to participate. I hope I've given you a little bit of information in terms of what you're going to get out of it as a developer, in terms of strengthening your career and growing your skill set, not just on the technical side, but also in terms of the skills that you're going to develop. Teamwork, communication, collaboration, those are all things that you're going to use heavily in getting involved in this work of the Java community process. It's important. It will create the future Java that you're going to be using as a developer 1, 2, 3 years down the road. So I leave you with some of these links where you can find out more information, specifically starting with jcp.org. Twitter is a great place to connect. jcp_org is the Twitter handle I manage for that. We also have some links here related to the GitHub organizations that I talked to you about. And you can also contact with me directly via Twitter. I'm there almost constantly, Heather VC. I try not to be connected constantly, but you know, I could get into even more career tips, but one of them is just integration. I don't really have a work and a life. It's a integrated work life, and it happens to be finding me online almost all of the time. So I think, am I out of time now, or do I have any time for
You're
questions?
just fine.
I'm just fine. Should we take a couple questions?
Yes, we'll take questions,
Okay.
but first, since you have finished your speech, and we're all fully informed about JCP, we'll take a test.
What?
Just kidding. Well,
What was the last thing you said? I'm sorry.
We'll take a test. We'll take
Oh,
a
a
test.
test. Okay, take a test.
Okay, so some questions. Any questions? Okay.
So, are the TCKs now open source by default, or is this a decision of the expert group?
Yeah, the TCKs are, it's the decision of the spec lead how they're going to license it. So there are some TCKs that are available via open source and some that aren't.
Anyone else? No.
No more questions. All right, well, I'll be around
Thank
the
you
rest
very
of the
much.
day. Thank you very much.
Three things before everything else. Not with you. The next session will start in a while, in a few, just minutes, right next. Before exiting the room, we would like you to rate Voxxed Days, just to help us improve ourselves. And something more, if you need the Wi-Fi password, it's Athenaeus Visitor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you.